from A to Z. I'm ZFi, this is Zombie Shepherd, and we are excited to be bringing you this new show in collaboration again with BanklessDAO and its audiovisual team. To be clear, opinions in this series expressed by either of us are our own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of BanklessDAO at large. In this series, we would like to study and discuss the first section of the Meditations on Moloch essay, written by Scott Alexander from Slate Star Codex. The essay discusses the concept of Moloch as a representation of systems and incentives that lead to suboptimal outcomes for both individuals and societies. The essay delves into various examples from history, biology, and economics to illustrate how competition often results in collective harm. Now, for those unfamiliar with Moloch, I can provide this brief introduction. In ancient Canaanite tradition, Moloch was a deity symbolizing child sacrifice. According to the writings, children were offered to what was described as the opened mouth of a horned bronze statue that was heated with fire from which they could not escape. Today, Moloch becomes a metaphor for modern society's all-consuming forces, drawing a haunting parallel between historical ritual sacrifices and the metaphorical sacrifices demanded by today's industrialized and capitalist world. Each episode of this series will discuss these encounters with Moloch. We will begin with a reading from Meditations on Moloch and then follow up with some discussion. Listeners, we encourage you to share your commentary, stories, and perspectives so that we can collaborate better in our efforts to detect and avoid the many types of Moloch traps that we find ourselves in each day. Let's begin by jumping right into a reading from Howl, Allen Ginsberg's famous poem on Moloch, followed by an excerpt from the Meditations essay itself.
What sphinx of cement and aluminum bashed open their skulls and ate up their brains and imagination? Moloch. Solitude, filth, ugliness, ash cans and unobtainable dollars, children screaming under the stairways, boys sobbing in armies, old men weeping in the parks. Moloch, Moloch, nightmare of Moloch, Moloch the loveless, mental Moloch, Moloch the heavy judger of men, Moloch the incomprehensible prison, Moloch, the crossbones, soulless jailhouse and congress of sorrows. Moloch, whose buildings are judgment. Moloch, the stone of war. Moloch, the stunned governments. Moloch, whose mind is pure machinery. Moloch, whose blood is running money. Moloch, whose fingers are 10 armies. Moloch, whose breast is a cannibal dynamo. Moloch, whose ear is a smoking tomb. Moloch, whose eyes are 1,000 blind windows. Moloch, whose skyscrapers stand in the long streets like endless Jehovahs. Moloch, whose factories dream and croak in the fog. Moloch, whose smokestacks and antenna crown the cities. Moloch, whose love is endless oil and stone. Moloch, whose soul is electricity and banks. Moloch, whose poverty is the specter of genius. Moloch, whose fate is a cloud of sexless hydrogen. Moloch, whose name is the mind. Moloch, in whom I sit lonely. Moloch, in whom I dream angels. Crazy in Moloch. Cocksucker in Moloch. Lack love and manless in Moloch. Moloch, who entered my soul early. Moloch, in whom I am consciousness without a body. Moloch, who frightened me out of my natural ecstasy. Moloch, whom I abandon. Wake up in Moloch, light streaming out of the sky. Moloch, Moloch, robot apartments, invisible suburbs, skeleton treasuries, blind capitals, demonic industries, spectral nations, invincible madhouses, granite cocks, monstrous bombs. They broke their backs lifting Moloch to heaven. Pavement, trees, radios, tons, lifting the city to heaven, which exists and is everywhere about us. Visions, omens, hallucinations, miracles, ecstasies, gone down the American River. Dreams, adorations, illuminations, religions, the whole boatload of sensitive bullshit. Breakthroughs, over the river, flips and crucifixions, gone down the flood, highs, epiphanies, despairs, 10 years animal screams and suicides, minds, new loves, mad generation, down the rocks of time, real holy laughter in the river. They saw it all, the wild eyes, the holy yells, they bade farewell. They jumped off the roof to solitude, waving, carrying flowers down to the river, into the street.
Alexander then begins his thoughts on this poem. What's always impressed me about this poem is its conception of civilization as an individual entity. You can almost see him with his fingers of armies and his skyscraper window eyes. A lot of the commentators say Moloch represents capitalism. This is definitely a piece of it, even a big piece, but it doesn't quite fit. Capitalism whose fate is a cloud of sexless hydrogen? Capitalism in whom I am a consciousness without a body? Capitalism, therefore, granite cocks? Moloch is introduced as the answer to a question. C.S. Lewis's question of hierarchy of philosophers, what does it? Earth could be fair and all men glad and wise. Instead, we have prisons, smokestacks, asylums. What sphinx of cement and aluminum breaks open their skulls and eats up their imagination? And Ginsberg answers, Moloch does it. Alexander continues. There's a passage in the Principia Discordia where Malochlips complains to the goddess about the evils of human society. Everyone is hurting each other. The planet is rampant with injustices. Whole societies plunder groups of their own people. Mothers imprison sons. Children perish while brothers war. The goddess answers, what is the matter with that if it is what you want to do? Malochlips says, but nobody wants it. Everyone hates it. And the goddess just goes, oh, well then stop. The implicit question is, if everyone hates the current system, who perpetuates it? And Ginsberg answers Moloch. It's powerful not because it's correct. Nobody literally thinks this is an ancient demon causing everything, but because thinking of the system as an agent throws into relief the degree to which the system isn't an agent. Alexander writes further. The philosopher Nick Bostrom makes an offhanded reference of the possibility of a dictatorless dystopia, one that every single citizen, including the leadership, hates, but which nevertheless endures unconquered. It's easy enough to imagine such a state. Picture a country with two rules. First, every person must spend 8 hours a day giving themselves strong electric shocks. Second, if anyone fails to follow a rule, including this one, or speaks out against it, or fails to enforce it, all citizens must unite to kill that person. Suppose these rules are well enough established by tradition that everyone expected them to be enforced. So you shock yourself for 8 hours a day because if you know if you don't, everyone will kill you. And if they don't, everyone else will kill them, and so on. Every single citizen hates the system, but for a lack of a good coordination mechanism, it endures. From a God's eye view, we can optimize the system to everyone agrees to stop doing this at once. But no one within the system is able to affect the transition without great risk to themselves. Pretty dark. Alexander admits this example is a bit contrived, but he continues in the essay with a slew of real-world examples of similar multipolar traps to emphasize its importance. In today's episode, we'll start with his first example, the prisoner's dilemma.
So Scott Alexander sets up the first example as follows. The prisoner's dilemma as played by two very dumb libertarians who keep ending up on defect. There's a much better outcome available if they could figure out the coordination, but coordination is hard. From a God's eye view, we can agree that cooperate is a better outcome than defect, but neither prisoner within the system can make it happen. The prisoner's dilemma is a fundamental problem in game theory where two individuals faced with the choice to cooperate or betray each other often end up choosing betrayal to maximize for their own benefit, even though mutual cooperation would have resulted in a better outcome for both parties. So yeah, that's kind of that's where we're going to go in this show. We've set up our first Moloch trap, and that's what we're going to be doing is attacking Moloch traps one at a time.
Right.
So I think we could start by maybe explaining the prisoner's dilemma a little bit better. I've got this great chart here.
Oh, perfect.
So we're not going to like totally sit here and try to explain every little thing about the prisoner's dilemma, because there's great videos you can watch about this that I think would do a better job than what we're going to do here, because we're really just trying to get into the meat of it and not try to 101 the whole thing. But essentially, you can see from this chart that if both people cooperate, they get 1 point. And in the case of prison, this would be they're both going to get 1 year in prison. So essentially, I guess the way the prisoner's dilemma, we can at least state it the way it's stated. So basically,
yeah, we can frame it.
Both of these people are separate. They're not together. And a detective is telling them, if you tell me what your partner did, you will get 0 years in prison. And so you're faced with this dilemma of, do I tell the cop about my partner, or do I cooperate with my partner without any knowledge of knowing what my partner will do? So my partner could
importantly, both parties are separated. Yes.
Exactly. So we are trusting, in order to cooperate, I'm trusting that the other person will also cooperate. And if I don't have 100% certainty that the other person is going to cooperate, it's more beneficial for me to defect. It is more because then I will end up with 0 years at the expense of
You're
that
off
person.
The hook. Right.
If we both defect, then we both lose. And that's another important part, because you are also, in order to actually win defection, you're counting on your partner cooperating. So in a large way, like the best way to get away with defection is to defect against cooperative parties. And that's where this really becomes an ugly trap, because if you want to be nice and you want to be forgiving, defectors will take advantage of you, because you are the prime territory to be taken advantage of.
Absolutely. And this model can be used in both directions. You're always trying to optimize for your personal score as an individual. But if you zoom out, the optimum score for the group of both individuals is that cooperate cell.
Right.
In this case, we're going for the lowest possible score. You want to reduce your number of years in prison as a result of this crime.
Right. And
if
so
both of you cooperate, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, like, this is one game. So we're looking at, on that chart exactly. There, we were looking at one game of the prisoner's dilemma. And in one game, defect always wins. But in reality, like, you're not faced with one prisoner's dilemma, because the prisoner's dilemma isn't just this one thing where you may go to prison or your partner may. It may be that you can make a greater profit by betraying your partner. You can make more money, or you can, even in social layers, like you can get the girl or get the boy or whatever it is. Like, you might get the favorable partner because you played underhandedly, and And so there's all kinds of situations in which being a defector or being non-cooperative with people around you can actually win you the upper hand in a situation, whether it be in money or social situations or whatever, in jobs. That chart I pulled up was actually from a LinkedIn article about competition within industries, and how, that ends up being kind of a prisoner's dilemma of, a number of things, like where, like, do you sacrifice quality for profits? Do you sacrifice regulation, following regulation? Is it cheaper to break the law and pay the fine when you get caught than it is to just
follow the law and lose out on the gains that are possible?
And then all the businesses that, and we're going to get into another one, but these are all very similar. Moloch. The thing about all of these different traps is, in a lot of ways, you can relate them. They're all metaphors, but you can relate these metaphors to the same thing. So in calling it capitalism, it's not that
the prisoner's dilemma is all of capitalism. All of these traps together end up all of the traps you can get mired up in. And in a lot of ways, you're playing many games with many people, and you don't know if the game you're playing right now is a prisoner's dilemma or a dollar auction or a Malthusian trap or, a race to the bottom, which in a sense they are all races to the bottom. But a lot of these traps have traits of each other. And the only reason we call them these specific traps is because there have been like statistical studies on these certain elements of game theory. So these are essentially, all of these Moloch traps are essentially different facets of game theory, and studying it in isolation to say this is just one binary, putting this chart back up, like this is essentially, if you think about it, this is like a set of binary things that can happen between two people, which is also a binary. But in reality, you're playing hundreds of these games at the same time with the same person and with other people. So you're playing multiple traps in multiple games at the same time. And like, that's what's dangerous about Moloch, is that you don't always know what game you're playing, and you don't always know what game your opponent is playing.
And the choices you may make in the game you think you're playing may have unintended consequences in other games that you may or may not know that you are also playing. So
right.
Where it becomes the trap is you're sacrificing some other value to optimize for your individual short-term score of whatever it is, whether it's dollars, whether it's reducing your jail sentence. It's the individual optimizing for themselves at the cost of something else, which ends up being essentially a net negative for society at whole, at large.
These end up being like things that drag down on the quality of life, the quality of the environment, the quality of other species. This is what causes extinctions. You know what I mean?
But none of those things are factored into the profit that you might get for that decision. So those are the values that you're sacrificing to optimize for one variable.
Right. And the other problem here is the idea that, like, if I don't, someone else will. So cooperating actually in the short term, in a one-of-one game, or even in a short run of games, cooperating will lose to defecting. And that's part of like why these things were studied by like Robert Axelrod, for one, ran numbers of tests and games doing this thing to see how these games played out over many games and what would happen. And, that's where we get a lot of these statistical analysis of the larger, you know what I mean? Like,
yep. I got a good example for it.
Mm-hmm.
I got that nested example. So in this particular example, this prisoner's dilemma of two actual prisoners, if you're going to team up with someone to do a crime, let me restart this. If you are going to team up with someone to do crime, implying that you're just doing crime now, it's not just this one particular crime.
It's a career.
That you get caught for. There you go. If you're looking at crime as a career, team up to do the time and the crime ahead of time. Get on the same page, because if you each cooperate in this particular example, if you want to put it back up, if you each cooperate and say, yeah, I did it, it was me, you each get 1 year in jail. If you each turn on each other, one person gets 0, one person gets 3. If one cooperates and one defects, but if you both turn on each other, you both end up with more than you would have gotten, more punishment than you would have gotten had you just cooperated.
Exactly, but extrapolate it to the next level where you defect, the other cooperates, you got 0 years, they got 3. 3 years from now, you're playing another game. 3 years from now, that person gets out of prison, and
now you're a snitch. And you've introduced a new game and a new variable.
Right, exactly. So
the other thing with that is, I guess just to finish that first thought, is if you're going to do crime extended, plural, if you're going to be criming,
yes,
you can get back to criming together sooner if you both cooperate and say, yeah, I did it, and you get your 1 year. You're out in 1 year. Both of you are out in 1 year, and both of you can go back to your criming together soonest.
Right.
Cooperate if you're criming. Now, two other points Do you want to step in?
Well, I was just going to say, if you turn it around and you put it at business, because this is the thing with business, it doesn't end in a sense until one of you goes out of business. So when it comes to doing business, like if you open up, a laundromat close to someone else's laundromat, then y'all are both competing for the same customers. And now how you treat each other and how you start to defect or cooperate with each other becomes a race to the bottom, or it becomes a monopoly, because you could either cooperate, which could be bad for the neighborhood, because maybe you both decide that all of our washers and dryers cost $250 per run, and that's that. But the defect would be the one that says, well, mine only costs $1.75.
That's right. Come on through. It's
and now yours
here.
only costs $1.50. And now yours only costs $1.25. And here's the thing. It's costing you $1 per cycle because of the electricity. So now you're charging 95 cents per cycle. And so you're actually losing money to gain customers.
Just to you're optimizing for customers at the expense of the value of profit
and that is simultaneously a race to the bottom and a dollar auction, because now you're competing for your opponent's dollar at a loss.
That's right. But that's next episode. We don't want to get into dollar auctions yet. I want to make a couple more points about that prisoner scenario, this particular scenario.
Yep.
I've already said if you're going to do long-term crime, cooperate, right? If you're just going to do a one-time crime with a one-time crime partner, you're putting yourself at a huge, huge risk, because both parties are incentivized to defect. If you know there's no second game, I don't have to worry about, getting a bad reputation because I'm never going to crime with this person ever again. You're setting yourself up for some high-risk defect scenario. Third, and this is the zooming out. Maybe try not to crime. Cooperate with society is crime isn't good. Society as a whole works better without crime. If you can cooperate with society and society is also not criming, that's the optimum outcome for all of society. So it's just, it's your levels. It's this playing multiple games at multiple times.
I would say that, the reason people often end up doing crime, at least on the poorer end of crime, is because they didn't have these social opportunities to take part in society in the way that would have benefited themselves. So, this is something we don't talk about enough in these things. We always talk about rational actors. We assume everybody's going to act rationally, and most philosophies and statistics think about the general or the rational actor. But we forget to think about the grudger. We forget to think about the people who literally just won't cooperate because I've already lost and I'm not going to cooperate no matter what. And
let me real quick explain the grudger.
I said the grudger, but it's not quite the context of what we're going to explain in that. So what I mean is more like, if you think about politically or whatever, like we have a lot of people politically who have put their heels in the ground and said, like, they're not going to budge.
This is it. I'm not changing my mind. Yeah.
Right. And they don't care where the future's going. They don't care, whether it be like trans rights or abortion rights or whatever it is. They don't care about anyone else's opinion. My opinion matters. And it doesn't even matter that, like, hey, the future's going this direction. It does, like, climate change is a good one. Like, that's one where, like, hey, we're going to move this direction, regardless of whether or not it's true. It's moving this direction because it's a better technology. It's cleaner. You know what I mean? Like, regardless of how it's affecting the environment, it's cleaner. It's more beneficial in a lot of ways. We're going that direction. We're always going to move towards the future. We stopped burning whale fat, and we're going to stop burning oil. You know what I mean? Like,
at some point,
reduce.
Unless we blow ourselves up first.
Right. We're going to reduce our reliance on oil over a long period of time, the same way that people stop. I mean, dude, if you go back to, like, Moby Dick is a great example because it's fiction, but it is literally about, like, the whaling industry is, like, right up against the oil industry at that point. Like, they're starting to become, like, that's right at that point. So it's like they're at the very end. They're at the top of the market for whale blubber, essentially. Like, that was it. It was down only from Moby Dick only.
That was the shift. That was the cycle shift.
So we don't think about how irrational people are and how sometimes people won't cooperate just because I would rather like not cooperate even if it hurts me. That's the point I was really getting to, is that people will healthcare in America is a great one to point this out with, because people are so against anyone getting anything for free that they are anti-healthcare even though they would get the healthcare. They would rather be sick than you get healthcare because you didn't earn it. And then they're so dumb that they would even say, I didn't earn it either. I didn't earn free healthcare.
Okay, I guess if they're sticking to their values, yeah, but
right.
It's usually not the way that the thought process goes.
None of us earn.
That's a good example. It's a good example. If we all were to say, yeah, healthcare seems like a good thing for all people. Like if we all just cooperate and say, let's maximize for healthcare.
Right. But we defect for reasons unknown, like, because in some cases, that's what's really scary about this game, is that in some cases people defect and still don't win. And I guess that's where we end up on defect, because in the end it's a stalemate. Nobody gets healthcare, except for the people, that can afford to pay for exorbitant healthcare fees. And then they can look down at everybody else and say, I earned this. Yeah. But
which does society no good.
And that goes back to the crime thing. That was the point, is that society not taking care of people is another form of cooperate defect that's outside of another game.
Absolutely.
So when you say, like, why is this criminal not cooperating with society? You could almost turn it around and say, well, why is this society not cooperating with poor people?
Right. What failed incentive has led to this individual not being able to access food, but still needing food to survive and resorting to crime to secure the food?
Exactly. And I saw an interesting thing that was like a grocery store in one day throws away more than a single person could steal in a year.
I've worked at a grocery store and been that guy.
Yeah.
Full shopping carts of produce every day. This was a small grocery store.
How long would it take for a single person to steal an entire grocery cart from a store?
San Francisco, 30 seconds. I mean, if we're talking about the sign of the times.
Well, I mean, inconspicuously.
Let's.
Yeah. I don't mean literally running in and cart and dash. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I've seen some pretty impressive videos.
What's that game show? With the grocery store where you run and just pile up as much as you can.
Yeah. They've got it down there.
Yeah, I forget that. There used to be a game show like that where you essentially run through a grocery store and you fill up your cart with as much as you can in 60 seconds and you get to keep whatever fits in the cart. Yeah, not that game.
But under normal circumstances,
but under normal, trying to sneak out some
bananas, it's going to take a while to reach a full cart of waste, of $0 produce.
Yeah, so it's even in our mind how we think about cooperate and defect, because we say that someone stealing food from a grocery store isn't cooperating with society, but we don't say that a grocery store throwing away 10 people's worth of food every night is defection.
Right.
And there is Moloch.
With the food kitchen and roll over your excess.
And see, there's Moloch, because Moloch in all of these traps, something you're going to find, I find at least in all of these traps, is the fact that being rational is irrational. You're playing an irrational game. So anything you do to act rationally will only further trap you into an irrational game. So when
you may be thinking this is a rational decision. You may be making rational decisions based on this environment, but the environment itself is irrational.
Right. And also you're making a rational decision based on this one trap, not realizing where it's almost like a game of like Twister, or, where, well, you're going to put your foot there because it's convenient now, but we're going to spin the wheel again.
Wait till you get right hand red and you're on the other side. Yeah, exactly.
And that's really what it comes down to, is you can win short-term games, but does it set you up for long-term success, or does it set you up for, and then this is where a third dimensional factor comes into this game, and that's reputation. if you gain a reputation as a defector, as someone who's non-cooperative, then how long before people just don't deal with you at all? Which means, in that sense,
You
in the
lose
metaphor, you're not even playing the game anymore. We refuse to go onto the court with you because we know you're a defector. And now you've lost the opportunity to play. So yeah, I feel like we have gone around it a lot, and we haven't really. So let's kind of talk about like what Axelrod found in these. So the way they conducted these games, the first one I believe was like 200 rounds, and there were 14 different models that they had, like potential ways of playing the game, and different ways to
behavior profiles.
Yeah, different behavior profiles for this graph. And they essentially ran 200 rounds of this game. And there's some great videos you can find on this. We'll probably put some of that stuff in the show notes so that you can go check that
Great
out.
idea.
But essentially, Robert Axelrod is a person who does a lot with game theory. And in this particular study, it was 200 rounds, and there were 14 different ways you could play the game. And so there were some things that emerged from that. And I want to say that this is the one in which they first found that defecting almost always came to a positive outcome in most games, especially in a single game. However, they found that tit for tat.
Wait, clarify that for a second. Defecting in most cases resulted in a positive high score outcome for an individual, the one
Correct.
that defects.
The one
that
that
advantageous to the individual
wins the round typically. Now, what they found is in playing multiple rounds, this strategy called tit for tat, which is essentially retaliation, or it's just clone your opponent's move. So that's the simplest way to think about it, because they related it also to like, if you relate this game, because if you think about it, if you look at that chart, that's exactly the chart we look at when we talk about genetics. When we talk about positive and dominant dominant and recessive traits, same exact chart. So if you take this into genetics and you think about it like that, then essentially a cell would either clone or not. It would either do the same as the other cell or not do the same as the other cell. It's a binary choice. So tit for tat is very back and forth, where we cooperate every time. But if the opponent defects, well, then I'm going to defect in the next round, even if you cooperate. So you cooperate, and then we end up in this tit for tat cycle where you cooperate, and I want to say in that round, whoever defected first or last won. But in most cases, in a random set, meaning you don't know when the game ends, tit for tat can never win. It can only break even. And so that the strategy of tit for tat so essentially when you're playing these hundreds of games, you can only think about like one of them has that strategy and the other one has its own strategy. So it's essentially two strategies against each other. And tit for tat is the personal strategy of retaliation. If you betray me, I'm going to betray you. If you're good to me, I'm good to you. However, they keep saying it like in this optimization for score. I also see Moloch, because in optimizing for score is not what's better for everyone. In general,
that's the problem. Yeah.
Having an extreme score, whether it be the highest or the lowest, isn't good for everyone. What's good for everyone is something that's good for everyone. In some cases,
it's the highest cumulative score.
Cooperation actually can make the highest. Yeah, like it can make the highest score sometimes, but if everyone does it, but your chances of everyone doing it is near impossible. Like, because if you look at it, not to introduce a whole nother thing, but there's the prisoner's riddle. And in order to solve the prisoner's riddle, you actually have to win a perfect score every time. And that's essentially what cooperate is. You have to have everyone cooperate always, because if anyone ever defects, now we have a defector, and we have to decide whether we tit for tat, which is retaliate right now, or whether we forgiving tit for tat. And so this was an interesting one. So the forgiving tit for tat means that I don't retaliate when you betray me the first time. So then I keep cooperating. So then maybe you come back to cooperating. But if you betray me twice, now I'm going to retaliate. And
But if you go back to cooperating, I'll go back to cooperating too.
Now, in that first game, there was no forgiving tit for tat. There was only tit for tat, and that actually won as the best choice. When they ran the game again, forgiving tit for tat was entered as one, and that one won the game.
That person, the person who used that, right? It wasn't that
model
formula of tit for tat didn't result in the highest collective score.
The forgiving tit for
highest. Yes, yeah. It was just the individual that resulted in the highest score.
When they ran the game a third time, forgiving tit for tat did not win because people knew about it.
Then you can be taken advantage of.
Therein lies Moloch also with all of these traps is as soon as you know the game, someone is going to take advantage of the game. Because
see that in crypto too.
And that's the thing is like, that's really what like technical analysis or like any type of like trying to gain asymmetry or knowledge is I want to know something you don't so that I can take advantage. I want to be early. I want to be first. And we view this, right. And we view this as very much like there's nothing wrong with this behavior. But in the end, like the entire like point of gaining the benefit is to have some, it's even if you say it's not a zero-sum game, it is, because it's not like you're going to get to, you know, it's kind of like no one is going to get rich so that they can pull all their friends up. You know, it's like, no, nobody's like doing it for everyone. You're doing it for yourself, or you'd be doing it with everyone. The reason you're not doing it with everyone is because you want to be the one. And whether that comes down to the rational one of just having the highest score or the irrational things that we don't take into effect, like ego and, you know, libido.
Biological drives of any kind, yeah.
So, and that's something I want to talk about, that I think that this is very much out of the view of Scott Alexander, and it's my personal view, and we can see how you evolve around this view as time goes through the episodes. But something I'm going to introduce early is, so I think that Moloch introduced as capitalism is akin to the Wizard of Oz. And the Wizard of Oz is the big head that has the booming voice and is scary and smoke and blah. And we can look at it and we go, that's the monster. That's scary. That's the great Wizard of Oz. That's the one that controls everything and causes everything to happen. Behind capitalism, behind Moloch, behind all of the reasons that we do irrational things, we do rational things within irrational games, which are ultimately just irrational things. The reason we even opt into irrational games comes into the man behind the curtain, the one pulling the strings. And that to me is ego and libido. It is the desire to have the better mate. It is the desire to have my choice of mate. It is the desire to be the best over other people for no other reason other than either just to feel good about it or to have my choice of mate. Like I want to have my choice of jobs, my choice of, I want the big steak. I want, you know, whatever it is. Like, so I think those things don't come down to, like, we always act like in our society, everything comes down to being a rational actor. And the reality is that I think even our laws are written around irrational, instinctual, and human things, like animalistic, and not even human, but like animalistic things. I think a lot of the things, like, I think that in literature, we often idolize like passion. We view passion, like whether it be lust or anger or whatever passionate feelings, we view those things as like uniquely human. This is what makes us human, is our ability to feel and act and have. And it's like, to me, that's probably not, that's animalistic. That is what animals are reacting to with these new things we're coming up with in our brain, which are emotions and ideas and ideologies. We're animals coming to terms with what you could call like the computer code of ideas. And you're being angry about ideas is not human. it's your animal side. It's the monkey reacting to something that it can't comprehend.
I can't get this stick in the hole to get those ants. I'm mad.
Right. And in a lot of ways, that is what the prisoner's dilemma is. Because you're saying, I can't possibly believe and cooperate. You're telling me cooperate is the best option for everybody. But all I see is if I go for mine, I'm going to get mine. Because the times when I have cooperated, I got screwed over. I cooperated.
You got less than the most.
Or I got less than and see, that's the other thing too, is this optimization for score being a loss. Like oftentimes in crypto, you'll see people say, oh, I sold too early. They're upset that they made profit. And it's like, because they didn't make enough profit. The degree to which I could have profited isn't enough. And it's like, dude, like, is enough? You didn't lose and you didn't break even. You won, but I didn't win enough. That's ego. Yes. You know what I mean?
Ego is going to be that one to drive you to, I'm not going to sell you. I'm not going to sell you. I'm not going to sell you.
And that's also why you end up losing.
Until you get dumped on. Yep.
And that's it. And that's why it's also irrational, is because if you sell and get out before the blow off top, you should feel good about that, as opposed to feeling like I could have wrote it up higher, because the times you wrote it up higher, you didn't sell quick enough and you ended up on the other side of it, depressed for months and months and months. So like, I think like you can't be happy with a lot of your decisions. And that's also something that I don't think is human. I think this drive and need for more and more and more is very Moloch. It is the idea. In a way, we are all Moloch ourselves, because we have the need for sacrifice. We want more. Give me more things. I want more books, more food, more property, more NFTs, more crypto. Like, we're bottomless holes for needing stuff. And Moloch just eats into that. Moloch is at the root of that, saying, yeah.
You need stuff, huh? I can get a cut out of here.
and it's also because like the more you get, the more you have to lose, the more you can be betrayed. By holding on to things, objectivity, like you become at risk of loss. Now more people even have a reason to betray you. You have
those are two whole separate things. Two very separate things. Just having something and then losing it creates a stronger negative emotion than getting it in the first place. So now you're fueled by that avoiding loss, which is stronger than the get in the first place. It's like,
right. So, I mean,
feedback loop of spiral Moloch nonsense. That's life.
Yeah, I mean, and we can start to like get into our concluding thoughts and close this up. We've been going for a good while, and I'm excited. This is going to be really great.
This is going to be a
series.
Fun one.
I'm having fun with this already, and it's going to be highly philosophical. And I really think we're going to get down some weird rabbit holes, especially when we start talking about AI and DAO and cryptos and other things. Like, this episode had a lot of reading. We had the poem and the early reading, and the rest of the episodes will probably have a lot less reading and a lot more discussion. And as we get further and further into it, we're going to be pulling into back episodes and talking more and elaborating more. So I really feel like this is going to become a quilt over time and evolve into something. This is something I got from another podcast, but it basically was studying the same statistical analysis of the games that Robert Axelrod had run. And what they kind of came up to is that over time, the best strategy to optimize for personally is to be nice, be forgiving, but be provocable. And what that means is that be nice means don't be the first to defect. Be forgiving means that when people defect against you, be willing to cooperate with them again. Don't become, I'm sorry, you were trying to bring this up earlier. Don't become the grudger, where the grudger is essentially a person who, you betrayed me once, I will never cooperate with you again. And so don't defect forever, be forgiving. And then be provocable means don't be so forgiving that you let people run you over. If someone, if you want to be the forgiving tit for tat, that's fine. Let somebody betray you. Be cooperative again. Let them betray you twice before you do something about it, so to speak. But don't become the grudger, and don't be a pushover. It's really,
and don't start off defecting, or no one's going to want to play.
Don't be an asshole.
Don't be an asshole. Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but you could go watch that clip from Team America about. There's the Team America about. I can't even say it. We're gonna get big time.
We're
gonna get big time banned. But
you haven't seen
I can't
the
even
movie.
say any of the 3 words involved. But basically,
it's a fun one though. Check
3
it out.
forms of genitalia. Just go look up, Team America. You'll find what I'm talking about. But in a sense, that is a prisoner's dilemma.
Do we want to cooperate with the terms of service of the websites that we're using? Or do we want to go for our juicy, spicy episode and start dropping, whatever references?
You know what? That's true. We
We're
released on
cooperating.
Web3, and we've already been getting blocked on Facebook and other services because they don't like us.
That's why we got the lens tube. So.
I kind of believe in the freedom of speech here. I'm kind of like, maybe I should just tell them. But it's also just, somebody else's content, so it doesn't matter. I cursed earlier in the episode. It's not really that. It's just getting extra vulgar, I guess. But but yeah, I mean, I think for me, like that's one of the big takeaways is be nice, be forgiving, but be provocable.
Don't be a
ready
pushover.
to defend yourself, whether it be in business or in any of these things. Like, don't be a pushover. Yeah, and then realistically, like, how can you identify a Moloch trap, or how can you avoid a Moloch trap? Identifying them is hard because we're always playing different types of traps, and you have to know, like, personally, what kind of game are you playing and what kind of game is your opponent playing? And for me, what's really funny about all of this game theory is a lot of this, like, relates to kind of like Eastern beliefs that I hold about Taoism, like Lao Tzu and Sun Tzu. And I can see how, like, in a lot of ways, like, the way to think about game theory is like Sun Tzu, The Art of War, because there's a lot of, like, platitudes in that talk about, like, well, don't, if you're at the bottom of the hill, don't attack. It's just common, like, you're going to lose if you're fighting an uphill battle. Like, that is, don't fight an uphill battle. So that can be taken to game theory in a sense, because you can just look at a game going into it and going, well, this person has everything to gain by defecting and nothing to gain by cooperating. And you can see that by the opponent. Meaning, like, if you have an opponent that's at equal tier to you, then you have more to gain by cooperating, because neither of us is bigger or more popular or more rich or whatever it might be, whatever standard puts you uphill. But if you're rich and you have a lot more to lose, or, you have a family and kids and you don't want to do this jail time, but I have no family and no kids, you have more to lose. Therefore, you're more likely to defect. So I'm going to defect. And that's a lot of this game theory does come down to psychology. And that's why we still love games like chess and Go, because these game theories are human psychology played out on boards. Like, and what I've often said about the market is that, technical analysis is just trying to predict sentiment. You're just really trying to predict, how do people feel today? How are people going to feel tomorrow? Can the astrology tell me how people are going to buy tomorrow?
Got to get that edge. I want to know so I can make the most, right?
Right, exactly. So,
and here we are again.
That's it.
That's it.
So what are your takeaways?
Well, I think we touched on quite a bit of them. The general, like, just cooperate, be nice, but don't be too nice. That's a big deal. That's something that you can extrapolate very easily to societies out of this very specific example. But I don't know, like you said, there's not a lot of ways to avoid these traps. They're everywhere. They're all the time. And if you're in one, you're not in the other. And if you're not in one, you're in the other. It's always.
If you are interacting with humans, you're playing a game, unfortunately.
If you're here, you're already in our broken system. Sorry. But hey, for the listeners, if you have encountered a particularly good story or example of prisoner's dilemma in your own life or your work or whatever, share it with us. We are deep in this research. We've been looking at tons of examples. We're chatting almost every day about it. It's on our minds. And if you've got examples, it's only going to help us, make better content. And plus, it's just interesting.
Absolutely.
If you've got cool stories. We love stories. So if you have something you'd like to share about the prisoner's dilemma, drop it in the comments. We'd love to see it.
Yeah, and some of these ones that come out, even if it's about some of the other Moloch traps that are coming up, like drop it in the comments, and we may be using some of these examples in upcoming episodes as reference points to talk about if they're really interesting stuff, because that's part of what goes into each one of these episodes is us really studying these types of traps and how we can apply them to real life things, not just in our own opinions, but in other people's opinions and in other people's, observations of the world. We're not just going purely on our own speculation about these things. We're kind of tapping into statistical data of experiments and mathematical theories. And there's a lot of thought experiments that go into these things. A lot of these traps were thought experiments that turn into statistical experiments. We're really, we would love to hear some anecdotal evidence from the audience that we can tap into for our episodes and really highlight those things. So, thanks for watching today's episode of Moloch Traps, The Prisoner's Dilemma. And we hope you enjoy this series. As always, none of what we said here is legal or financial advice, and we encourage listeners to do their own research in these areas before making any decisions related to crypto or AI or any other political investments or anything we said. So if you find our content informational, educational, or entertaining and would like to support us, please collect these episodes on Lens or LensTube. 18% of the proceeds go back to the BanklessDAO. 2% goes to LensTube for hosting our videos, and the rest helps to make From A to Z Productions possible. So please stay on top of this weekly series. Subscribe to us on BanklessDAO YouTube. Don't forget to follow, like, and comment while you're there. And we will see you next time, friends.